and welcome to another Storytime Sunday. This is Miss Katrina, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and also comment so that we know who has seen this video. We are going to be reading the rest of our Monsters book. So, we read the first two chapters, so we're on chapter 3 now. Chapter 3 is called Monsters at Sea. What lives far beneath the waves, no one really knows. Huge monsters could be hidden there, deep down in the dark. Long ago, sailors were afraid of sea monsters. When rough waves tossed their boats, they thought monsters were trying to shake them into the sea. At any moment, one might rise up and pull them under. Map makers wrote a warning across the oceans. Here be monsters. Sailor beware. Imagine fishing on top of a monster. Some Norwegian fishermen took that risk. The fish they wanted swarmed around a sea monster called a kraken. This creature was the size of a small island. It was 1.5 miles wide. That's pretty big. Well, let me show you the picture. Usually a kraken floated peacefully in the sea, but if it divided, it made a huge whirlpool. Fish, sailors, and ships were all sucked deep into the water. Krakens had big, staring eyes and sharp horns. They could wrap their long arms around a ship and pull it under. Sometimes they pulled down whole fishing fleets and ate them. Other water monsters lived in the lakes and swamps of Australia. They were called bunyips. Bunyips were dark, hairy creatures. They had long tails, sharp tusks, and big claws. If a child fell down into a lake or swamp, bunyips gobbled them up. When children heard the cry of a bunyip, they turned and ran away from the water as fast as they could. So maybe don't go in swamps in Australia. This is this guy. That's a bunyip. A Japanese water monster, the kappa, also liked to eat children. But there was a trick that kids could play on the kappa. This monster couldn't live from the water, so whenever it came out on land, it carried water with it in a little hollow on top of its head. Watch out! A boy was playing near the river when he heard a shout. His father was standing above him on a cliff and pointing. The boy turned around. A kappa had jumped out onto the river and it was coming towards him. It was hideous. It looked like a monkey with the beak in the middle of its face. It had scaly yellow skin and a hard shell on its back. This is the picture of that. And a little boy running away. The boy started to run, but his father yelled, "Stop! Turn around and bow." The boy bowed to the monster. Even though kappas were fierce, they were also polite. When the boy bowed, the monster bowed back, and the water on top of his head spilled out. The monster gave a horrible cry and ran back to the river. Well, but what if you didn't know that trick? Suppose a kappa did grab you. It still might let you go if your parents gave it a gift. Gold? Silver? Diamonds? No. The gift that worked best with the kappas was cucumbers. If a family took a swim, they brought cucumbers with them. Each person wrote his name on a cucumber. They threw the cucumbers into the water before jumping in. That kept them safe from the kappas. Another water monster, the Midgard serpent, was so long it could circle the whole world. This huge monster was the nose of a Norse god and a giantess. As soon as it was born, the Midgard serpent began to grow. The king of the gods was sure the serpent was evil. He flung it far out into the ocean. Under the water, the serpent grew and grew. Finally, it was so big it wrapped itself around the world. It bit its tail to make a giant circle. Sea monsters seem to live in every river, lake, and ocean. No wonder people were afraid near water. But the sky was just as dangerous. Flying monsters might be there, ready to swoop down and grab them. Chapter 4. Flying Monsters. Attention! The Shogun is coming for a visit. Please leave this mountaintop for 3 days. In 1860, Japanese soldiers left the sign high on a mountain. It wasn't for people. It was for Tengus. Tengus were flying monsters that lived in the mountains. Tengus were also shapeshifters. They could make themselves look like huge birds, or they could look like people with red faces and long noses. When they looked human, Tengus carried fans made of feathers. Every time they shook their fans, tornadoes roared down from the sky. Tengus caused all kinds of trouble. Sometimes one would speak through a woman's mouth. It said weird things, so people thought she was crazy. Sometimes Tengus challenged men to swords fight. That was scary. Nobody ever won a fight with a Tenga. This is it. You see his long nose? The government of Japan didn't take any chances. When an important person came to the mountains for a visit, soldiers put up signs. They asked the Tengus to please stay away. Signs might work with Tengus, but nothing worked with harpies. Harpy is the name that means grabber. Harpies had mighty wings, ugly faces, and fierce claws. They had bodies like women's, and they had ears like a bear's. They lived on a Greek island, but they often flew over the water to gobble up sailors. Harpies were filthy and smelly. No matter how much they ate, they were always hungry. If harpies saw someone eating food, they grabbed for it. If they touched it even for a second, it would smell horrible and taste awful. Here's a harpy. No human could eat it, but harpies loved it that way. The most famous flying monster is the roc. It looked like a huge vulture with big claws and sharp horns on its head. How big were rocs? They were big enough to pick up elephants with their beaks. They carried the elephants high into the sky and dropped them. The elephants burst into pieces on the ground below. Then the rocs flew down to gobble them up. Sinbad the sailor was a brave man, but rocs terrified him. Sinbad was a hero in the Arabian Nights, a book written in Arabic hundreds of years ago. He was born in Iraq and sailed the world. Sinbad was stranded on the island. At least it seemed to be an island. A white dome took up most of it. But the dome didn't have any doors or windows. In fact, it wasn't a building at all. It was a roc's egg. The island was really a roc's nest. Suddenly, huge wings blocked the light of the sun. The bright day turned into night. The mother roc was coming. She didn't see Sinbad as she settled onto her egg. How could Sinbad escape? He had an idea. He unwound his turban into a long strip of cloth. He used the cloth to tie himself into one of the roc's feet. The roc flew off with Sinbad hanging beneath her. Finally, she landed. Sinbad untied the cloth and ran away. Griffins weren't as big as rocs, but they were just as dangerous. They had the bodies of lions and the heads of eagles. They had the tails of snakes and claws as sharp as knives. Their eyes glowed red, blue feathers covered their heads and wings. Griffins came from India, but they lived in other countries too. They liked shiny things. They made their nest of gold. This is the Sinbad. Picture of the Sinbad. There's Sinbad and the rock. This is the rock for its claws, and this is Sinbad. Every day they flew out to find treasure. They brought it back to their nest and guarded it carefully. If anyone came near, they tore him to pieces. If you saw a bird monster coming, it was time to duck and run. But what should you do if you weren't sure just what was coming towards you, a man or a monster? Chapter 5. Monsters or men? In 1958, a crew was building a road in California. One morning, a worker found huge footprints nearby. A reporter wrote a story about the footprints. He called the creature that made them Bigfoot. Almost 10 years later, a rodeo cowboy named Roger Patterson made a film. He showed a Bigfoot running through the woods. Most scientists thought the film showed a man wearing a gorilla costume. Then a hunter snapped a photograph using a camera tied to a tree. He said it was a picture of Bigfoot. Others said it was probably a sick bear. One man even claimed to have lived with a group of big feet. He was camping in the wilderness. One night, something picked him up, sleeping bags and all, carried him a long way. Then it dumped him on the ground. 4 ape men stood over him. They seemed to be talking, but he didn't understand what they said. They didn't hurt him, and after a few days, he was able to escape. This was an interesting story, but there was no proof it was true. Many people claim to have seen Bigfoot. Did they really? Was it a mistake, or were they just playing a trick? People described these monsters as half human and half ape. They said big feet were covered with long, shaggy hair. Sometimes hair like that was found stuck on fences. But where did it come from? Big feet walked on 2 legs like humans, but they were much taller, 8, 10, even 15 feet tall, and they smelled awful. For some people, searching for Bigfoot is a hobby, but they have formed Bigfoot clubs. They like to meet and share their Bigfoot stories. Some say they have heard a Bigfoot howling and screaming in the wilderness. One group of campers said a Bigfoot threw stones at them. Here's Bigfoot. Bigfoot stories come from all around the world. In Nepal, people call these monsters Yetis. When British explorers came to Nepal, they called them abominable snowmen. They believed they saw their footprints in the snow, but some people think the footprints were made by Tibetan blue bears. Don't know if it's Tibetan blue bears. In China, an ape man called the Yeren is said to eat people. In Africa, people fear the Chemosit, an ape man that eats only people's brains. And Australians tell stories about the Yowie, a fierce ape man with red eyes and long fangs. Some people think ape men are a missing link between monkeys and people. But scientists do not believe that. Explorers have searched far and wide for ape men. They have never found any. Yet there are people who insist that they have seen ape men hiding in the deepest, darkest woods. Here's the abominable snowman. Or Yeti. Maybe they're trying to explain things that they really saw and didn't understand. Maybe they're just making up stories. Or maybe they really saw a monster. What do you think? Alright, and that is the rest of Monsters. Don't forget to comment so I know who's seen this. Make sure that you subscribe so that you'll always be notified when you see a new video. And you comment, we could do a shout out for you for next week. And your name will be put into a weekly drawing. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.